What really awakened my passion in historical fashion was the 2005 version of Pride and Prejudice, so Regency fashion has always had a very special place in my heart. I feel like there's also been a little bit extra attention on Regency-inspired fashion in the last few years due to Bridgerton, and I decided to see if I could knit an entire Regency dress, starting with some research to see how historically accurate a knit Regency dress might be. By the way, you might have seen some of these videos before. I've just decided to put them together into one long segment so you can maybe put it on in the background and enjoy while you're doing your own crafts. Okay, so let's go back to starting the research into knitting and Regency fashion. I want to see how probable it is and how out there my idea might be to make a Regency knit dress. And surprise, surprise, or maybe not very surprising, we do have two examples of knit Regency dresses. The first one is from Denmark. It is knit in a beautiful orange wool. It is hand knit, which is so impressive to me. There are a few things about it that really stand out. So you can see that the bottom has kind of like a chevron almost diagonal pointed arrow kind of design, and the top bit of it is a little bit more of like an open lace work. The museum listing itself calls it azure. I think that's how you would pronounce it. And basically, I think that means kind of new, but from the history that I could look up, that was a term at the time that meant lacework or open work, so open work designs. But this also kind of reminds me a lot of Regency fashion plates that I've seen where you're wearing like a very gauzy, almost net-like material over the base of your dress. This kind of reminds me of kind of like that gauzy material. Am I going to hand knit an entire dress like this? I don't think I have the patience or stamina for that, which is why I also got really, really excited when I found this particular knit Regency dress from the V&A. This one is machine knit. As the pictures from the V&A of this particular dress are not in the public domain, I can't share it with you here in this video, but I'll leave a link in the description below to that piece in the collection so you can take a look. It's really beautiful. Instead, you'll have to contend with this really, really terrible hand sketch recreation of the knit dress. It's gorgeous. It's knit lace over a golden silk. But yeah, this is kind of what I'm referring to give you an idea. Look at the link for the original. It's much more beautiful, of course. And if you know anything about me, I love my knitting machine. I have a few knitting machines, antique circular ones, vintage flat knitting ones, but this particular knit dress is something called warp knitting. Warp and weft knitting are slightly different. Weft knitting is similar to the kind of fabric and material that you would get and the kind of same knitting style that you would get if you're working on a knitting loom or if you're hand knitting. Versus warp knitting has a slightly different structure to the fabric. Would be interesting if I could create it, but I don't have anything that can create it, so I'm going to do an adaptation. I'm going to use my own knitting machine, which is a weft knitting machine, to create some fabric for this. Now this dress, in my opinion, leans a little bit more evening/ball dress. We don't have any trains that we can trip over. We have a lower neckline. We have shorter sleeves. It's also a beige, light off-white color, which reminds me again a lot of that like gauzy overlayer or like netted overlayer that you would wear to some of the evening ensembles that I see in fashion plates. This is the dress that I want to recreate very, very much with my own knitting machine. You might be wondering, this is the Regency era. They're using machines, knitting machines to do this? Yes, knitting machines have been around for a long time, since the 1500s. Stockings were the first things that were made on knitting machines. I'm going to be using a different knitting machine than you've seen me use in the past, and this one is newly acquired, but previously loved pretty heavily, so it needs a little bit of work. So this is the first step of this entire process. Let's go over to my knitting machine and see what we can get to work on that to see even where we should start on designing this knitted Regency dress. So this is my new to me Brother knitting machine. It is a Brother KH881, which means somehow before it got to me, it originated in Japan. Apparently, it's supposed to be one of the best punch card reading machines that Brother's ever made, and Brother already has a great reputation for knitting machines, so I'm really crossing my fingers that this is going to work because I need the punch card to work for my lace. I think it's been worked a little hard and potentially a set in storage for a while because it is in need of some cleanup. So before we get to trying to make much of anything on this machine, I think it's time to give it a good cleaning. Oh my goodness, that took a while. So I had to change out all 200 needles because I don't know if you can see, it might be a little hard to tell, but all the ones that were in the machine were fully rusted out. So these joints need to operate super smoothly, and most of them were fully rusted. So all 200 needles had been replaced. I'm just missing two things in order to fix this restoration. The first is this machine was missing the clamps. When you're using a knitting machine, it is pretty physical and there is some resistance. So if I were to do this without securing this to this table, it would just fly off the end the moment I try to push the carriage across. Carriage across. So I ordered some new clamps and they fit and it's great. But I didn't realize there was only one. So I need the other one. It needs really two clamps to hold it down. And then the other thing is, this is the sponge bar for the machine. This kind of acts as a spring for the way that the needles work and the action of the needles when they're in the machine. So that top bit is kind of what the sponge should look like. I mean, it is literally a piece of foam kind of sponge material that's on here. And do you see how flat it's been pressed after decades of use? The first thing that you usually have to do when you get a vintage knitting machine is you have to replace or rebuild the sponge bar. Depending on your machine, you might not be able to get a replacement, you might have to rebuild it. And I could have sworn that I had the materials to rebuild the sponge bar, and I just can't find it. So I'm gonna have to see if I can get that ordered in a reasonable amount of time as well. So we're almost there, but we're not there yet. We can't knit with it like this without the sponge bar really being the spring that holds it in place. So I guess I will see you really soon again, probably in a few days' time, when all the stuff arrives and we can finish this machine restoration and we can test out some lace patterns. I'm excited. I need to vacuum up the absolute mess that's at my feet, but the sponge bar is rebuilt and we can put this in position, which, by the way, yeah, look at the thickness of that. It's just really nice. You have to push down on the needles as you're putting it into your machine. Oh, this last bit. Oh, there we go. That's in place. Oh, wow. With the new needles and a new sponge bar. It's just perfect. Like, it just sounds right. We definitely need to anchor this though to the table. This table though, I think it might be slightly too thick, so I'm gonna have to see if there's something else that I can clamp the knitting machine to. And the next thing that I want to do is practice plain knitting. I've never operated a brother before, so this machine type is new to me. Let's go find a new spot to clamp this to, and I'll clean up the absolute mess I just made. It's a few days later. I have moved the knitting machine to a different table, ones that the clamps would fit on. Also, I am wearing my really comfortable shark wearable blanket and I'm looking a little tired today, maybe because we spent most of the night in the ER. Don't worry, everyone's fine. Everything's fine. I'm just a little tired today. Today, the first thing that I wanted to do was practice a little bit the plain knitting setup because I have never used this knitting machine before and it's similar to my other ones, but I looked at the instructions, it operates slightly differently. So I want to get used to that first before I start doing anything more complicated like lace patterns. And I want to make sure I understand all the buttons so I don't accidentally do something that could break it. This is my first time casting on with this type of cast on comb, so we had a little bit of a hiccup at the beginning, but I think I figured it out and it looks lovely. This knitting machine runs so smoothly so far in the plain knitting. I think between the new needles and the new sponge bar, it makes it so much smoother than the other one that I have at home. I never want to be overly optimistic, but with how lovely this has run so far in plain knitting, I'm going to try to switch to lace knitting. I have high hopes and I'm trying not to let them run away from me. This is a beauty with how smoothly it runs. Cross your fingers for me that the lace operation works. Let's say works, and I can figure it out. Okay, there is a slight problem with the pattern reading mechanism and the timing belt of the pattern reading mechanism. This is completely different to how my Singer machine does lace knitting. Like I've never used two carriages at the same time. I've never used a timing belt before, but this is why YouTube is amazing, because I found a video from the Answer Lady Knits. She and her husband describe something that is almost exactly the same issue as what I'm having here, where the pattern mechanism advances multiple times in one row, and it's an issue with the clutch. So I'm going to take the top off of the lace pattern punch card reading thing and see if I have the same issue. Fingers crossed that it's the same issue, because they have a detailed step-by-step tutorial on how to fix it. So let's see what we can get done. Oh boy, that's dirty. Okay, let me go grab the vacuum cleaner first, and let's clean this out. This is a mess. Yeah, that should not be happening when it does that. That should not be happening. It should stop. In case you're interested, yeah, you see how this guy is being pushed out of the way? That shouldn't be happening. It should be sitting all the way down here. And then when I hold it in place, yep, you see that? That's operating properly. I think this guy is bent out of shape. This is that piece that's off the machine. It looks like a 90-degree angle, but there's a slight, it's so slight, but there is a slight tilt upwards to it. There's a groove worn into this plate from the thing going underneath it, and the longer that that's allowed to happen, the deeper it'll go, and the more that that will continue to happen. So I'm going to see if I can bend it more acute and then put it back in place to the point where it'll finally catch that clutch rather than letting it spin around underneath it. Okay, I've screwed this now in place. Let's see. Ooh, it struggles in this direction. Okay, that way works fine. I think it's something else besides that. Like, what is getting, something's getting stuck. What's getting stuck? I haven't really been able to find an answer as to why in one direction it's easier than the other. Basically, the answer is I should probably have a look at the underside, but I don't really want to do that at this moment. So what I'm wondering is if I should just operate the machine with this cover off, so that when I'm going in the direction that causes me problems, I can give that extra support, the piece that needs support, because it works when it has the proper support. It's a little strange, but if it works, I guess. Oh my goodness, you guys! I got the lace pattern to work. It might be a little hard to see because of the very strong pattern in the background that this is hanging in front of, but it's absolutely beautiful. I am so happy. I can't tell you how happy I am. I've tried so hard on my other machine to make lace work, and there's been so many issues. This one isn't a walk in the park either, but I found a workaround that I think actually works. It's gorgeous. So I'm gonna try a different lace pattern and see what that one looks like. I can't tell you how happy I am. This is so exciting. Now that my test piece is off of the knitting machine, you can see there are 4 different types of lace that I can make based on the 4 punch cards that came with the machine. The first one that I made down here, which has kind of these interesting columns and diagonal lines, this reminds me the most of the original pattern that I'm trying to copy. This is another really beautiful design, but reminds me more of like the tops of some stockings that I've seen. I like this open work pattern, I think, for the sleeves. This is the 4th pattern, also very pretty, but I think it's a little too much solid amongst amongst the lacework. I want mine to be a little bit more open. So at the end, again, I have decided to do this for the body or the skirt of the dress, and then this open work for kind of the top of the dress, the bodice, and the sleeves. I am doing it in Knit Picks Alpaca Cloud lace weight yarn in the color Sophie. So this is the test piece that I made in that yarn just to test out exactly what weight I needed to do, if there's any changes that I need to make in order to make it work with this particular yarn. There were some changes I needed, and now I want to kind of take together the inspiration, some of the fashion plates and what I saw in Bridgerton, and create a dress design out of that. The top layer is going to be that machine knit lace that I'm going to make with the combination of the very open holes and kind of more of the columns of lace pattern design between the skirts and the bodice and sleeves. That's going to go over a slip that's going to be in a deep blue color. I love the color blue, and you can kind of see what that looks like when I'm holding it over my little wearable blanket to see how that overlay is. In the Regency period, the hems, especially when you're going for a ball, are not all the way to the ground. Seeing an ankle was not that scandalous at the time. Also towards 1815, if you look at a lot of the fashion plates, the gauzy layer is shorter than the dress or little slip that you're wearing it over, but I've decided to make them both about the same length. It's a little bit more of what Bridgerton does, and it's personally the style that I'd like to go for, so the skirt length is going to be the same. That is going to be the design of my Bridgerton inspired knitted Regency gown. I'm really excited to continue working on this. This is been almost a month, I think, that we talked about my idea to make an entirely knitted version of a Regency dress. I think a lot of times we think of projects being kind of like this route that you take from an idea to the end point. I'm hoping that eventually we will arrive at the end game, which is making a Regency dress. But as I sunk my teeth a little bit further into learning how to do lace on my Brother knitting machine, I realized that I had gotten a little bit off track, and we ended up with a completely different garment from a completely different time period. So let's pop on over to my knitting machine and let's see what we end up making this time. Seeing as we're going to be making a bunch of lace today, we have to start back off at the machine first. It might be a little tight to be able to fit one of the panels on here. Like, I want to make my lace panels as big as the panels of my sewn under dress. Okay, so very quickly, as a brief summary of exactly what we're doing, because I don't think I introduced that very well, is I would like to create a Regency dress, but I want to hand knit that like mesh overlay. There are examples of this from that time frame. This is from the Danish Museum. This is an entirely hand knit overlay piece, which is just incredible to me, but I'm going to be making mine on the machine, which there was also a machine knit version at the V&A, which I can't show you due to copyright reasons. And then I decided to design my own dress, which is kind of Bridgerton inspired, which has a blue silk underlay and a machine knit lace overlay. The underdress and overdress are going to be made from the same pattern, so I want the knit pieces to match up to the sewn pattern pieces. That's what I'm talking about here. I printed out the largest one, I taped it together, and now I'm going to hold it up out here to see how wide I can get it to be. It looks like I can only make up to a size 4 of the largest panel of the skirt for my dress. And yeah, I am not a size 4 on this pattern. I am somewhere between a size 14 and 16. So size 4 is definitely not going to work for me, so I'm going to have to think of a different way of doing this. I can also try is to make a few more gauge swatches that are a little bit lower tension to see if I can stretch the width of these panels in blocking just a hair. So I'm going to do another gauge swatch, and especially this one I didn't finish any of the edges, so they're unraveling. So I'd like to do some more gauge swatches where I can actually steam block them and measure them and get some better information on what size to make my panels so that my overdress and my underdress kind of match up, hopefully. So I honestly do not remember what we were talking about or saying the last time I updated you all, because I ended up getting really sick. I've been quite ill for the last 3 weeks now. and I have been trying to get back on it, and I'm finally feeling mostly better. I tried to get back to it a few days ago when I had a migraine, and we ran into a lot of issues, so I thought I would wait for a clear-headed day to revisit. So let's take a look at what some of the problems are and see if we can fix it. The last time I was at my machine, I was attempting to make the gauge swatch for knitting this lace because I want to know exactly how wide and large I need to be knitting these pieces in order to match the pattern pieces of my dress. Now here's a bit of the issue. It might be not so easy to tell. Maybe if I take these weights off, you can see a little bit more. So you might be able to see that here and here and here, there's some irregularities in the lace. And I don't think I have it happening right at this moment, but what I've been noticing is that, okay, do you see how these knit loops are around only the needles? They're around just the needles. There's also these pegs here at the front, and the stitches, the yarn, is supposed to go in front of them like this. But what I've been noticing and what happens when you get something like this or like this happening is that this slips on the other side of it. I don't know how that's happening. One of my theories is that I'm not knitting with enough weight on the bottom of this. Usually with lace patterns, you need even generally on the knitting machine, you need quite a lot of weight on the bottom to pull the pattern pieces down. I'm gonna go see if I can find some better, because these were really only putting weight on very specific parts, and it was kind of I don't like how these are acting, so I have some other weights that I'm going to try out that I brought with me. Okay, so these are weighted bars, so I feel like they distribute the weight a little bit better. Sometimes you want a little bit more weight at the ends, or else you get stuff happening like here where it kind of gets loose. This is a practice round and my gauge swatch, so we're trying to figure it out. Oh, actually, there's one spot that I can try to show you, I think, where the same problem is happening. Let me take the weights off and you can see a little bit better. Right there. Can you see that? This loop right here, and if I can actually pull it up and over this peg, oh gosh, that's really hard to see. It's off that peg, and then you'll see how it kind of leads to this issue in the lace. Let's see if we can avoid that happening again. Okay, so here is my gauge swatch off the machine. This is my first attempt that went a little sideways, as you can see with the larger holes here, the big rip that happened here. This is a looser tension than what I knit before, and I made all those changes that I talked about. I tightened up the tension, I lubricated my machine, and I did something else, but I can't remember it right now, but that led to this bit of the sample up here. I do think the quality of this looks much, much better. We had a few hiccups, but not as many. I do wish that the looser tension could work. So this is actually the fabric of the final dress, kind of the petticoat that goes underneath, the lace overlay, and it just feels a little opaque. I don't know. I don't think that I've mastered the lace technique yet on this new to me machine. I think I'll need a little bit more practice until I can make really large panels of lace that are, or like I feel good enough about to use for my dress. So I think I'm gonna practice making a little bit more lace. Should I do it at the looser tension? I kind of want to do it at the looser tension to see if I can get that working. So let me practice that a little bit and see how far we can get. I have this piece of lace off of the machine now. The left side of the machine has some sticking points with the lace. The samples that I did before were very much more on the middle of the machine, which ran smoothly without any issues. I did a wider sample this time, and on the left-hand side and like a few times on the right, I had some hiccups. I am so glad though that I'm practicing this, because The first few rows, it took me a long time to spot what the mistakes were and figure out how to fix them. But now I can see it just as I'm doing it because I know this lace pattern so well. But in order to figure out what is going on with each side of my machine, I think I'm going to do at least 2 more samples where I'm going to cast on and knit on just the right half of my machine and then cast on and knit on just the left half of my machine. I have currently 2 theories on why I'm having some trouble. One is I think I hung too much weight. You need a good amount of weight on your knitting in order to pull the stitches down. I had more weight on the left side of my knitting than the right, and I think that that causes some problems when it's trying to move into the right direction. Just a theory, so I'm going to hang less weight. The other one is regular use unsticks pieces of the machine in certain areas. So I'm hoping that if I work on just the right side and then just the left side, maybe unstick some of that stuff that was causing it to gum up. But it's pretty late in the evening, so I'm probably going to stop for this evening with this little sample of lace work, and we'll continue in the morning with casting on some more bits of this and practicing on different halves of my machine and seeing if we can figure out what exactly is causing it to gum up. Knitting these lace pieces, I'm knitting it only on the left side of the machine to test out what's going on with those issues that I'm having. You can kind of see that there is extra wrapping going around the gate pegs, and rather than sticking the loop from one needle to the other needle, I think my lace carriage is sticking it from one needle to the gate peg. What I'm going to do is I'm going to check, because it's always happening in the same spot on my lace at the moment, so I'm going to check the gate pegs in that area and see if there's something that I can tell that's either bent out of shape or if there's something wrong with the needles around that issue area. The thing is, I already knit my test piece on the right side of my machine, and rather than like trying to figure out what was going on, I don't know why, I was just manipulating it by hand to fix the issues. If I can figure out that that's the problem on the left side, I'm gonna have to knit another piece on the right side because I don't remember where all the issues were happening, so that I can fix that, and maybe even the center of the machine, because I'm not getting the overlap in the middle. So before I knit like the really wide pieces of lace, I would really prefer to be able to just do it automatically rather than having to hand manipulate all the errors and issues that pop up every single row. So let's loosen the tension, check all the needles, and see if I need to bend any of my gate pegs back in a different direction. You know what's wild to me? There's a gate peg very obviously bent out of shape right here, but there's been no issues with the lace knitting right there. So it makes me kind of doubt the bent gate peg theory. But I also just felt all of the latches on all the needles around where the issues are happening, and they're operating very smoothly. I'm just gonna re-grease it. Well, it's not grease, lubricate it, I guess. See if that helps. Oh, the issues right there. Okay, so I did change the tension of the yarn mast, which is the yarn that feeds into the knitting carriage. After I thought about it, it's impossible for my kind of yarn wrapping around the gate peg problem for that to be the issue. I see how it's the problem for another kind of related issue, but not the same thing. Anyway, I won't get into the technical details, but it is fascinating to learn more about the machines like this. However, the gate peg positioning was the problem. So as I have been feeling them, it's a really slight difference, but what is consistent between all of the ones where the yarn has wrapped around the gate peg rather than been transferred to the needle over, the gate pegs are more forward. From where I'm sitting and looking at the machine, they're closer to the needles, And I guess that interrupts the action of moving one stitch over to the next needle. And so when I use my screwdriver, I probably should find some pliers to do this, but I use a screwdriver to bend them a little bit backwards. It's fixed it completely. So I'm really excited. I think we found the problem. So my gate pegs are bent. Let's wrap it up quickly with this section, which is I want to double check because I had problems last night on the right side of the machine. So I need to do another pattern test on the right side of the machine, and then I want to do a pattern test on the middle of the machine. You might be asking, why don't I do it across the entire machine? I do want to do a test across the entire machine, but it's a lot to take all at once. So I'm kind of splitting it into thirds, which is making it a lot easier, and I may or may not be actually making something out of these pieces, so it kind of works out. Best of all worlds, I have 2 more pieces to knit, and I have 2 more sections of my machine to test out. I promise, I'll show you what I'm making at the end of this. So if you were a little bit impatient, decided to skip right to the end to see exactly what it is that I'm knitting, also don't worry, I think I would have done exactly the same thing, then you might have guessed that this is actually a 1940s bed jacket. It is hot in the summer here outside, so I'm a lot of times wearing something sleeveless, but when I come indoors, my parents' house has radiant cooling that works very, very well. It is kind of freezing inside, so this is the perfect lightweight cover-up jacket to keep me warm while I'm inside without absolutely boiling if I have to step outside for a second. The baby alpaca in the lace pattern is just that perfect breezy but warm. I promise I will be getting back to knitting on the Regency dress. I have figured out the lace pattern forwards and backwards on this machine. It's actually fascinating. I can talk about that a little bit more in detail next time. Hey! She had to say hello first thing this time. We took a little bit of a detour on our way to making a Regency knit dress, and I made myself a very comfortable and useful 1940s bed jacket. And I think we are finally going to get to making the lace for the Regency knit dress. I want to make a full mock-up of the dress first in fabric to make sure that it will fit me once I make it in knitting. You might notice that I'm already in my Regency underthings. That's because I'm a little bit ahead of you right now. So why don't we get you caught up to where I am, and then we can make tons and tons and tons of machine knit lace. Okay, I got my parents' help to put this on. Love it so much. Now the main things that we need to discuss is the fit of this bodice, right? So I put in a drawstring here to draw everything a little bit closer together, and it's actually what is done in the V&A example, but I don't think the gathering is quite this strong. I don't want to put darts into my knit fabric. If you look at the V&A, and we can look at my sketch of the V&A one, there is a seam across like about half the bust, and I think I can move the darts into that seam. Before I do that though, I think I'm going to make another version of this top where I have removed this excess from the top here. I want this to be more about the knitting than the sewing, so why don't we do a fast forward transition to when I have the front piece of this pattern figured out for my blue petticoat. And the adjustments are done for the petticoat layer. I'm still going to put a drawstring into this to pull this tighter in the final petticoat. Now it's time for me to make the adjustments to the front bodice piece. This is the dart adjustment that I made here. Now these darts are going to be turned into kind of a cross seam. Let me jump right ahead to show you what the mock-up looks like for the knit lace layer. This one was a little bit more complicated, but I think we ended up making it work. Look at that. Can you see that seam line there? And it runs right up into my arm. Last bit of this mock-up we have to finish are adding these sleeves. Let's skip forward to when I've got some sleeves on my mock-up. And we've got one sleeve on. Now this, when it's finished, will be gathered along the bottom. Here comes the next question. When I made my lovely bed jacket, I knit every piece to the exact shape that I needed. Looking at the V&A piece, I don't think each piece would have been shaped in itself. I think that they would have just knit an entire long panel of fabric and cut the pieces apart. I'm going to follow that same methodology. Basically, I'm doing a whole bunch of steeking, which is kind of terrifying. Good morning. So we are going to get ready to start making some of the lace on my knitting machine. I've totaled it all up. I'm going to be making 5 panels of lace in the main lace and 1 panel of lace in the accent lace. Before I just kind of hammer away at making all these big lace panels though, I kind of want to sit down and show you how this Brother knitting machine makes the lace. Last time when I was knitting the lace for the bed jacket, you might have noticed that I was actually working with 2 carriages on my machine. The carriages ride along the machine bed, and the carriages are what feed the yarn to the needles to make each knit stitch. Well, the idea is that this carriage on the right hand side that has this yarn feeding into it is the only thing that feeds the yarn to the needles. So when I'm knitting with this one on the right, that is what is forming these stitches. When I'm using the lace carriage on the left, that is moving stitches left and right in order to make those kind of knit two togethers that you would see in a lace. This punch card will actually tell my lace carriage what to do. So it reads these holes to know what needles to pick and select. So this is going to be row number 1 for this next set of 2 rows of lace. So we're taking my lace carriage from left to right. Now it has read my punch cards and it has selected these needles. It's done nothing to the stitches. It's just by selected, I mean pulled forward these needles into the working position. So for a better view, you can see here, these needles are pushed forward according to the lace pattern. On our next pass, it's going to take all the stitches that were on the needles that were selected or pulled forward, and it's going to move them 1 needle to the left. This right here was the selected needle that we were watching, and the stitch is now gone off that needle. This needle has no stitch anymore, and instead that stitch has been moved 1 to the left. You might have noticed that on that pass, and it's not the only thing that happened, but some new needles came forward and they were selected. And these new needles that came forward on the next pass, the stitches that are on these needles are going to move 1 to the right. Let's watch that happen. At the end of the 4 moves with the lace carriage, we are in the position to actually form stitches. Right now the stitches has just been moved left and right. We've never actually formed any new stitches. So now this is with the right hand carriage. We're going to move it once. Now our knitting carriage is blocking our lace carriage, so we got to move it back to the right. And we've created another 2 rows of lace, but with 6 movements of our carriage. So let's show you that all together in quick succession. And that's how 2 rows of lace are formed on the Brother knitting machine. Okay, so now that we have gone over exactly how the lace is formed on this Brother machine, I think it's time for us to actually start making the lace panels. But wait, I know I keep on saying, but wait, one more thing before we do that. I want to make what's called a cast on rag. I'm going to be making quite a few panels that are nearly the entire width of my knitting machine, which is 200 needles. Casting on is the hardest part I have found so far for me. And there are many methods to cast on a knitting machine, but I find all of them quite finicky. There are like cast on bars that you can use, and I own cast on bars, but they're all slightly bent out of shape in some ways. And with yarn that is a little bit more robust, a little bit thicker, a little bit stronger, that doesn't pose a problem. I've used it fine. But with the lace alpaca that I'm using, I have found every single time that I've tried to use it, I have ripped it and the cast on doesn't work. So I've switched to what's called a E-wrap cast on method, but boy, is it tedious. And even with this cast on method, I still manage to only successfully cast on maybe once out of every 3 or 4 tries. And so I want to use something called a cast on rag. I'm following a tutorial by the Answer Lady Knits. What a cast on rag does is it allows you to start knitting as if you had already cast onto your machine. So you don't actually really have to cast on. Let's try making the cast on rag. My cast on rag is complete. You can kind of see that there are these long loops that hang over the needles. And this is really easy to put on the needles rather than doing an E-wrap cast on. I've been debating what piece to knit on my machine first. I kind of wanted to start with the widest piece so that every piece after that feels a little bit easier. But the widest piece is the front piece. And I kind of want to do that not as my first one because I think that's going to be the most obvious bit of knitting. So I think I'm going to start with one of the back panels. On the sewn piece, I have 2 panels that I cut out of the fabric and I sew it together. Because my knitting machine isn't wide enough, I've had to break it up into 4 pieces. So let's get started. I've already got my cast on rag hung and let's start knitting. No! Look at this! Oh my gosh, how did this happen? Oh man. Okay, I have 2 options now with this kind of error. Either I fix it as best as I can, or I start over. I think I ripped it, so there must have been some extra tension somewhere on the machine. That's usually what causes that. I'm a little sad because everything else is going so well up to this point. I think I spent about an hour on this piece already. Let's see what it looks like when I hang it back on. I don't even know where these go. I would just hang them randomly so it doesn't unravel too much. This just feels like, that feels like too much to try and fix, to be honest. I'm not confident enough in being able to do that. So I'm going to take this down and we're going to do this. AKA, we're going to start over. Am I a little upset about that? Yeah, I am. I was hoping it would go a little smoother, but maybe I just have to work myself into the rhythm again. It's been about a week since I knit the bed jacket, so maybe I just need to refresh myself. And this was the false start, but let's start over. One more time, here we go. Okay, I am literally 15 rows from being halfway done with this piece. So I've gotten quite far. Can you see that? Got quite a bit knit. And look what happened, it jumped off. And I know last time I gave up on trying to fix it and I started over, but I am like an hour and a half, almost 2 hours deep on this particular one, so I really don't want to start it over. I'm going to see if I can rescue it. I'm going to be 100% honest. I don't think I can follow the pattern of what was here. I think I'm just going to try to have to get these stitches in the best condition that I can with what I've got at the moment, and hope that it looks halfway decent by the time I'm done. All right, it's not perfect, but I hope that it'll be good enough that when I start knitting again, it'll look half decent. I am now officially at 250 rows, so we're just past halfway. I should have 490 rows on each one of these panels, and I came to a thought that I'm getting more and more nervous as I do this, because I worry every single mistake from here on out is that much more terrifying. So I'm wondering if I should put in a lifeline, because we put in lifelines when we hand knit in case there's mistakes, then you can ravel back and it's safe at that point. It won't get any worse from that point forward. I don't know if anyone else has done this before. I'm sure people have thought about it, but I haven't seen it in any of the other knitting machine videos. But I don't know. It's at least a fail-safe to get me back to this point in case anything else goes wrong in the future. Let me knock on wood. I don't know if my side table is real wood. Oh, these skis are real wood. Here we go. Oh, geez. Okay, well, they're about to fall over, so I don't know if that's very lucky. Yeah, let's put in a lifeline. I feel much better now that the lifeline is placed. Honestly, I have no idea what the technique would be to use the lifeline to put a piece back onto the machine, but at least I know that it won't unravel past the halfway point. And I was just starting my first few rows, and look what happened. Now, I don't know if this would have fallen off if I hadn't been manipulating the needles to put in the lifeline. All I know is whatever did happen didn't unravel at all because I had my lifeline in place, and I couldn't be happier about it. So let me put these back on the needles and put the stitches where they're supposed to be, and we can keep on knitting. And I think from here on out, I will definitely be putting more lifelines in place. I just feel so much better. I can't tell you. Seeing that come down and then just not go anywhere, it's like magic. The lifeline is magical. I'm about 150 rows from finishing, but Nutella just jumped on my lap and her eyes are open now because I'm talking, but she's sleepy and she's about to go to sleep and I'm not about to wake her up. So I don't know if I'll be able to finish anything more tonight, but number one priority is letting this girl sleep. So instead of sitting on my lap by the knitting machine, I was a little too warm. Nutella has now claimed her usual spot in the curtains. She loves being underneath the curtains. I call it her fancy dress. Isn't she cute? She's asleep. I think the lovely sounds of the knitting machine puts her to sleep. We're on row 356 and we have to get to 490. I just put another lifeline in at every 50 rows. I'm doing lifelines right now and that's working quite well for me. So I'm just gonna keep on chugging along. Oh, thank goodness. Has gone dark. It's 9:30 at night, so this one panel has taken me all day. I have 3 more panels this size to make, 1 panel to make that's even bigger, and then 2 more after that. So hand making this dress with a knitting machine is way faster than hand knitting it. And I think we agreed upon the term that using something like the knitting machine to make something, it's still handmade. It's just not hand knit. It's machine knit, but still handmade. This 1 panel is a day, and it's not even blocked yet. There's some things that I have to fix. There's some faults in the early bits of it that I have to reinforce. I have to block it. I have to take out all of the intermediate stitches, like my lifelines that I put in. Yesterday, I spent about 8 hours making the first large panel. I had thought that I had plenty of practice after doing my bed jacket, but it had been a few days, like almost a week since I had last done the pattern, and it took me a while to work into it, so it did end up taking me a full 8 hours. I then stayed up past midnight last night and I made another panel the same size. That one only took me 4 hours, so I have the time that it took me to make it. I'm at a bit of a crossroads, right? So I have to make 2 more of approximately this size, but I'm out of yarn. Well, not quite. I don't have enough yarn to make the rest of the entire dress. I placed an order last night, or I guess really early this morning, past midnight this morning, and I did an express shipment, so it'll be here in a few days. What is the best next thing that I work on until the yarn gets here? I can continue making the big panels out of the main lace for the back and then the skirt front, because I'm in the groove now. I feel like I'm confident I can make the skirt front, and I think it'll have minimal faults. At the same time, I also want to gauge swatch the accent lace. I've also just spent 12 hours over the last 24 hours knitting humongous panels of the same exact lace. And the accent lace, I only have to make 1 panel of that lace, and it's not as big as the rest of these panels. And I'm going to see if I can swatch the accent lace, and I can show you what the accent lace looks like. Whoops-a-daisy, I zoned out, and this is what happened. Yeah, I don't know this lace pattern as well, and I zoned out for a second, and then it dropped. Why is it important that this lace pattern is different? Let me show you something real quick. Here's the new punch card. You probably saw me putting this into the machine, and there are all of these marks on the left-hand side, and they tell you what to do with which carriage. So these pink ones on the left are the movements with the lace carriage. So my next movement was supposed to be from the left to the right with the lace carriage, and then it'll move 1 tick down, and I'll go from right to left, and then I get to this black mark, and the black one is when I move the knitting carriage. So this one on the right here, so that always goes, it's an around, because it goes around from right to left and then left to right, and then you start again with the lace carriage. So you see that they're not evenly spaced, so I do 2 movements with the lace carriage, and then 4 movements, and then 4, 2 and 4, 2 and 4. With the main lace, it's always 4 movements with the lace carriage, so I must have mixed them up. So this is kind of the problem of context switching, right? My brain is used to the other pattern, and I have to be a little bit more alert on this one. So let me rehang it and redo this gauge swatch. I made a few more mistakes on my second attempt, but it's off the machine and it's been blocked. I took the measurements on this, so now I know how much I need to cast on in order to make this piece that I'm gonna make for the accent lace. I only need to make 1 panel. I'm gonna have to cut 2 sleeves, 2 shoulder straps, and like the little accent piece up there out of it. So I'll cut all the pieces out of it, but I'm only making one panel to cover all of the needs for that. I guess I'll see you back at the machine when it's time to knit my accent lace panel. Well, I guess it's time to see how useful those lifelines are. Look what just happened. Oh my goodness. I'm almost 100 rows in. It makes you wonder how much it's worth it for me to try to rehang on the lifeline or if I should just restart. So I'm going to first see if I can rehang it on the lifeline. I also had a bit of an oops at the bottom where I pulled off the cast on rag before I put a lifeline through that. Yeah, so this piece is a little raggedy. Okay, let me see if I can fix this. I just started trying to rehang the piece that fell off, and I realized that the lifeline does make it a lot easier in case anything happens. However, I didn't take a note of where in the pattern I was with that lifeline. So even if I managed to rehang 190 stitches onto my machine, I don't know where to start. And if I choose the wrong part of the pattern to start at, you know, because I was saying like one of them it's 4, another one's 2, there's going to be a really obvious mark through the middle of this piece. It does make you realize like the lifeline is a good thing, but I think I got a little too reliant on that with the last one because I didn't know where in the pattern I was. All these things to think of. I guess at least it gave me the false confidence to get the piece done last night. I will cast on now for the sleeves and I'll do that panel and then I will block the pieces that I have because that's what I can do at the moment. We are done. Look at that delightful bounce and how sheer and airy it is, and it's before even blocking it. I'm on my last ball of yarn that I have, and I have this much left, so at this point I think we can block the bits that we have. While I am less than halfway done with knitting all the lace that I need for this Regency dress, I do need over 50 square feet of lace in order to make this. I think I'm going to leave this video here for today while I'm waiting for the rest of my yarn to show up. If you want to see how this dress turns out, feel free to subscribe because that's exactly what the next video will be, hopefully finishing this handmade knit Regency dress. While it's definitely been a challenge getting all of this knit, I am enjoying the process very much so far, and I am so excited to see what the next steps will look like. So thank you so much again for joining me today, and I hope I will see you all again very, very soon. Today's the day. We are finally finishing this series where I took inspiration from this hand knit Regency dress and another dress at the V&A to design my own version, but I was going to machine knit it. Of course, it wasn't very easy and I had some hiccups along the way with my machine, and in the process of figuring that out, I ended up kind of taking a detour and making a really cute 1940s bed jacket. Last time I was finally able to make some really large lace panels on my knitting machine so that we could sew it into an entire knit dress this time. Of course, I ran out of some yarn, but thankfully it arrived quickly. It took a few days, but my highly anticipated order of more yarn arrived, and I was able to finish knitting the rest of the lace panels that I needed in order to make the dress. And again, because I want to focus a little bit more on sewing my knitting bits rather than sewing the under petticoat, I have finished kind of the under petticoat in this lovely silky blue. I am quite nervous about sewing my lace panels, and I think I'm going to start with quote unquote the easiest bits, aka the skirt bits, because there's only 2 seams at the front panel that need to be steeked. This is one of the panels for the skirt back. The knitting machine couldn't make panels this wide, so I had to split them into 2. So I think the easiest piece for me to start on is basically sewing up my 2 knit panels right here. No steeking required, just sewing bits together, which is definitely not as scary as steeking, but still not scary. So I've got my first 2 skirt panels pinned together, ready to sew, but I thought rather than doing it on my finished pieces in case I rip something, let's do it on a bit of scrap of my knitting first. The second question is, what kind of stitch should I use? When I have knit fabrics, when I'm sewing stretchy things and I want them to be stretchy, I tend to do a zigzag stitch. But I don't know necessarily that I want these seams to be stretchy. I think I'd rather them be a little bit firmer so that they hold the shape of the piece, because I don't want the piece to drag out and stretch out so much over time. So having some rigid stitching lines might help support the structure of the dress. That works quite well. You can see how stretchy this bit of the knitting is. This is where I didn't stitch anything here. And then here's where I stitched. And you can see that it holds its shape much more. So I kind of want that rather than the stretchiness. I guess step 1, let me change out my threads and then we can start sewing together my panels. I think everything's set up. So let me take my panels and I'm just gonna go for it. I'm not gonna think about it too much. I'm just gonna go for it. It's just sewing in the same spot. It's not really feeding it forward. So let me, there we go. Okay. It wasn't grabbing onto the fabric, but I think now it's pulling it forward. The problem is right now that the weight of the panels is stretching out the fabric, and if I put the seam in with it stretched out, when I wear it, it might be warped. So I'm going to try really hard not to let this stretch down like this, but keep it kind of propped up so that I'm not artificially stretching out the piece as it's being sewn together. The first seam is complete. You can kind of see it right there. It won't be as visible because, like I said, this is part of the back panel. So this will basically be gathered into an area about this size, honestly. And then that goes in the back like that, my little poofy detail. I'm really pleased with this so far. Okay, so I have to sew the other 2 panels together like this as well. And then I have to sew the back panels together at the back. And those are all going to be non-steeked seams. So I'm not going to show them to you because they're basically exactly the same as I just did now. And I think I've worked out some of the kinks. So let's fast forward to when the back portion of my skirt is done and we have to go to our first steeked seam for the front portion of the skirt. Okay, now we have the back of the skirt done. It's time to do some steeking. And we have some things to think over a little bit. So let me show you where I have laid out some of the pattern pieces on the petticoat of the blue petticoat and how we're going to do this with the knit panels for the steeking of the front panel. Okay, so what you're looking at on the ground is the blue petticoat that I was wearing at the beginning of the video. On the right hand side are the pattern pieces, and on the left hand side we have the lace panel for the front. Now this pattern piece is for the skirt front, and I'm going to point out 2 things for you. The first is that we have quite an excess of hem here. So the actual front panel of my dress ends here versus the panel ends there. Two reasons, seam allowance and hem. Now you'll notice my lace panel already has a hem. So I don't want to make my lace panel as long as this because then the hem will drag on the ground. So I'm making it this long. Now let's go to the top of the piece. I've decided in order to save myself a steeked seam that runs across here is I'm going to combine these two pieces up into the arm side. So this is going to become a new seam right through here, and then that'll become a new other piece. So my steeked seam will run from that corner all the way along the front panel and then up the front bodice bit. It might not look it when you're looking at it here, but this is actually an angled seam, which is why this is going to be our first steek seam, because it's not an up and down line, it's a diagonal line. I have a few ideas on how exactly I'm going to make this steeked seam, but what is definitely sure is that I am not cutting into this fabric until I have stabilized it fully with sewing. So I think I'm actually going to use a contrast color thread on my flat piece of knitting to mark the line that I should be sewing. Then I'm going to sew them on the sewing machine, and only then, when I'm very sure that the pieces are safe and secure, am I going to cut off the excess. Which means that step one is going to be marking the steeked seams, aka where I'm going to be sewing some things first with a contrast color thread. So let's start with that. Okay, I don't know if you can see it, maybe a little bit more up there, but I have now traced very generally the line where I need to, well, steek. This is the cutting line, and then the sewing line is 5/8 of an inch inwards. So definitely not cutting yet. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my big back panels and I am going to line it up here and baste it in place by hand. This is going to take a while, but I think it'll be worth it. Okay, I have sewn the first seam, and you can see on the front panel we have quite a bit of excess towards the top because it really decreases in width towards the top. I'm not going to cut that out yet because I only have one seam here, and at some point, not right now, I'm going to reinforce it basically right before where I'm going to cut it so that when I cut it, it won't even try to unravel to where this seam is. But I wanted to try it on with my petticoat first and take a look. Yeah, I'm going to have to think through how to do this seam so it doesn't look so obvious, but again, I haven't trimmed the excess, but wow, doesn't that look kind of fantastic already? Okay, let me sew the other side on and then maybe all the way around so that we finally have a skirt piece that we can look at all together. So the skirts are kind of in a heap over there because I want to work on the next pieces, which are the bodice pieces, and they're a lot more fiddly. And here is the start of them. So these are all of the rest of the bodice pieces that are going to be made in the main lace, and then the other ones are going to be made in the contrast lace. Now you can see I outlined where I need to steek basically in this blue thread for each of the pieces. On the skirt, the idea was that I outlined where I needed to cut eventually, but then I placed the other piece in front of it and I sewed it without having to cut quite yet. With these, however, I'm going to have to cut them out at least a little bit because I can't sew them with all of them together like this. My plan is to sew basically a double reinforced line of stitching around each piece and then cut that out so that I have each piece individually. And then each piece individually I can then place using these markers against basically the start of the bodice that I have over there in that pile attached to the skirts. It'll be my first steeking that I'll have to do is cutting these out. So let me sew kind of the reinforcing bits first before I do any of the actual steeking things. Should I have originally tested this maybe on a scrap piece of lace that I made and then I sewed and then I checked it? probably before I continue to sew a lot more on these knitted pieces, because it's not easy to sew on like very airy lace. I'm just gonna test it. You might be wondering, why didn't I put some sort of stabilizer behind this? Like, this is gonna constantly shift and move as I sew it. It might not have nice straight lines. And to be honest, now that I had that idea, I probably should have done that, but I'm gonna be a little bit stubborn. Because I don't want to go out to the store and grab some, and I'm going to try it this way. I might regret those words, but you might be yelling that at me right now through the screen, trying to tell me to use a stabilizer, but yeah, we're just going to try it this way. We're going to wing it, kind of, and see if it works. So let's try our first steeks. So I'm just debating where to cut first, and I think I'm going to cut this piece out like this. Here we go. This is going to be my first steek. The more I think about it, the more nervous I get. So sometimes I just have to close my eyes and do it. Oh, wow. Wow, that's scary. Okay, before I get any closer, let me just double check. Are we gonna unravel past the sewn bits? So if I do this and I get to the sewing, how in danger am I? Is what I'm trying to test right now. How safe does the sewing make me? Oh wow, look at that. Okay, so it actually does not unravel past the sewing. Okay, that makes me feel better. So let's keep cutting out. Oh, this is making me, like, I know I stabilized it, but this is still kind of making me sick to my stomach as I'm doing this. This is really scary. No matter how many rows I use to stabilize it, this still is kind of terrifying. Officially, the first cut into the lace is done. And I can go pin this onto the rest of the dress and start sewing the shaped bodice pieces in place. But first, let me cut out the rest of the pieces so I have them all nice and separate. I'm not kidding when I say that I am currently a bit nauseous, so I'm gonna go drink something and maybe eat a little something. That was not easy to do, and I need to settle my nerves a little bit before I continue working on this. Okay, I'm feeling a little bit better from the nausea that I got from doing this first Steeking cut, and I have pinned this first seam in place to where it needs to be sewn. Here's that first bodice seam. Now, the other side is still incredibly messy because I haven't fully decided yet on how I'm going to finish all these seams. I think, want to take the time to attach all of the bodice pieces together and then take a holistic approach to finishing all of the seams in the safest yet maybe not super noticeable way. All of the bodice pieces on both the right and left side have now been attached. It's so hard. It doesn't really show up that well on camera, unfortunately, so I feel like I want to show you better, but it's hard to see. Here's the petticoat because we're using basically the same pattern in a slightly different version. Everything is now sewn together. So I've sewn these front panels in place, I've sewn these back panels in place, the skirt is sewn, it's just not sewn to the bodice. And what we don't have attached, we don't have the straps attached, and we don't have the little front accent piece attached. I was gonna continue, but it's like past 8 p.m. right now, and the more that I work closer to my bedtime, the harder I have falling asleep because my brain is just processing everything I've been doing. So I'm gonna go to bed, but tomorrow, the first thing that I want to do, because I have all the bodice pieces in place, is I want to sew the skirt to the bodice and then put in some temporary straps so that I can try on the knit overlayer for the first time. I have to wait an entire day for that. You guys get to see that immediately, where I am attaching the skirt to the bodice. Good morning. I am back with my basically pile of lace. And today my first task is going to be sewing the bodice to the skirt. Right, Nutella? Oh, she climbed right into my lap. Oh. She likes the taste of my lipstick, so that's why you'll see her oftentimes attempting to eat them off of my mouth. Oh, and it's time for some more digging. Isn't that just the best angle? Where were we? Sewing the skirt to the bodice. So about the underarm to the back, I need to sew the skirt in, and that includes some gathering and things. Oh my gosh, I've been sewing all day and I went to review the footage and I somehow managed to corrupt my card. So that took a little bit to fix. Unfortunately, it means I lost basically all of me attaching these skirts to the bodice now. I kind of want to get to the next step and then I can tell you what you missed. Hopefully that's okay. That's where my patience is at the moment with the frustration of losing some footage. So I've sewn the skirt on and we have a ton of excess material. So I'm going to chop that excess off. That's the back of it. That's the front of it. It all looks super floppy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the paper straps. I'm going to cut out another one and then I'm going to pin this into my dress, get an idea of how this is going to look. And then I'm going to try to put the lace bit on top as it is now. And please keep your fingers and toes crossed for me right now. I'm scared. I'm back in my slip underdress. I don't even have it on yet and I'm honestly getting a little choked up. I'm getting teary-eyed. I'm so excited. Okay. Just have to be very careful getting into this. The pins want to stick to each other in the knit dress. Ow! Okay, ouch. How does it look? I can't see myself. I can only look down at myself and look at my very, 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 very small picture back there. What do you think? Something that's very much sticking out to me is the fact that this is knit fabric, right? So it stretches with the weight. I've actually been seriously contemplating how to add structural support, especially around the shoulders. Something I didn't think about when I decided to make the straps out of the accent lace, is that lace is even less structurally sound than my main lace. It's gonna stretch like no tomorrow, and the entire weight of this knit dress, which you wouldn't think is that much, but it's actually substantial when you just have this much material. I could actually run like a very quick ribbon through the waistline and tie that back so I can see better how that holds and better how much more support this dress might need. Okay, put a ribbon through where the waistline ought to be, and you can see that it sits very low at the moment. So I just checked it out in a full-length mirror and I love it. Definitely needs structural help so that it doesn't drag so much. The other problem is, I was kind of thinking that this is a problem when I was sewing the skirt to the bodice, but again, I lost that footage so I can't show it to you, but I sewed one side about maybe this much shorter than the other. So if I pull the back all to one even length, look at this side, we're going up in the back, and look at that side, we're going down towards the back. So my hems aren't even side to side. I sewed this one shorter accidentally. I don't think I can unpick it and redo it because, like I said, I sewed over it like 3 separate times. So trying to undo those seams is going to be near impossible. The best thing that I can do is either match the shorter sides, but maybe. The other thing is I can reblock the skirts. Knitting takes very well to blocking. And the last thing is I actually want to add a blue satin trim to the bottom of this dress, matching the original one that I'm going off of. And in that, I think I can fudge the hem unevenness just a little bit, you know. All right, let me take this off because the pins are really poking me now, ow. And let's get to work on the accent lace. The bobbins run out. No! That whole last bit of sewing did nothing because I didn't have a bobbin thread in. Typical. That's okay. We'll wind the bobbin. Okay, I know this looks like such a mess, but I have the accent piece on and the shoulder straps on. One thing you'll notice is the very uneven line here. I'm unsure if it's because I sewed this at a different height or the skirt's at a different height, because right now with this unevenness, this was actually the side that had the shorter hem. And now my hem is basically even all around, but I think it's more distracting to have this be slanted. I'm gonna put this down for tonight. I knew that the construction of this dress was going to be a pain because of how stretchy knit fabric is. And I'm not an expert seamstress. I just sew as a hobby, really. I mean, I do all of this as a hobby, so I don't really know what I'm doing. So I think I might attack this dress again in the morning with some measuring tapes and see where we're off. But this is what we look like. Lots of things to think about. It's a little too late for me to think about them this evening, so I will attack it again in the morning, and I will see you then. Another day of working on the Regency knit dress, and I had a lot of things that came up unexpected today that I had to take care of, so we're in the evening already. The first thing we have to do is sew the right side of the gown about 1 inch higher. It's just that the seam on the right hand side, I put about 1 inch too low. So what I'm going to attempt to do is sew that seam directly above it by about 1 inch. I'm nervous, but let's try it. I've managed to re-sew that one seam and undo the bit that was already sewn, so that's kind of a miracle. There's also already a run in the knit fabric that I managed to catch that I obviously didn't sew down well enough. I'm starting to realize that I probably should have done the bodice first, then the skirts separately, and when everything was even, tried to sew them together. But even if I would have done that, I don't think I have enough experience sewing stretchy things. I honestly should have just stabilized it in the first place. So I'm wondering if my best bet right now is to actually baste my knit overdress to the petticoat. I think that is my best chance at getting something somewhat even. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of suggestions in the comments, and I welcome them. I don't know that I'll ever take on a project quite this scale and difficulty in the future, but there might be others who are inspired by this, and rather than them diving in like I did, maybe you can give some suggestions below on how to do this better so that others don't struggle as much as I have. I have pinned the knit bodice to the sewn petticoat or underdress, and it's looking, I mean, the frazzled edges look very frazzled, but in general, I think the bodice part is looking good. The thing is, the hem length is still very different. I am a bit worried, I won't lie, but I think getting the bodice right is most important, and then the hem, I have some ideas, so I'm not going to worry about that now. I'm just going to get the bodice correct first. I'll jump forward to when sleeves are attached to both. This is not easy. None of this is easy. But we're gonna get there. Quick update. We've got sleeves on the petticoat. They need to be gathered at the bottom, but they are in place. Anyway, let's jump forward to sleeves on the lace dress. It's hours later. We've got this looks like nothing on camera. But the sleeves are on the knit dress. Oh my gosh. Feel like this is a ghost. I think it's time to go to bed. We've got some work to do, but we'll do it in the morning when I've had a little rest and a little think about what to do next. I'll see you then. I should have just gone to bed. I thought I would trim up some seams, and I think I got a little vigorous with it. I'm just gonna leave it alone. I'm gonna go to bed. I'm looking at this in the morning. Oh no. Let's just hope it's me seeing things and nothing's actually wrong. I'm gonna pretend that, and we're gonna come back to all this in the morning and everything's gonna be fine. Good morning. Thankfully, I was kind of losing it last night, so what I was worried about cutting was actually a scrap piece, not a scrap piece, but it was a piece that it was fine. Basically, at the end of the day, it was fine. I was just way too tired. It was way too late. And generally, it's a really, really bad idea to cut into handmade lace when it's well past midnight and you are not well rested. Would not recommend. This morning, the task is doing the finishing steps of the gown. So basically, the entirety of the gown is now together, the knit portion, but I need to reinforce the seams because I really need to trim back the excess in order to be able to baste it to my petticoat. As you can see, I'm in the middle of it. We just lost power. So maybe I'll give it like half an hour and then we'll see if I have to abandon this or not for now. Okay, it's looking like we got a call from the power company. This is going to be a longer outage, so we've started the generator and... Oh, what? Oh, now it's out. Okay, there was a flicker. There's a flicker of hope that we can keep going. And I'm just reinforcing the skirt seams now so I can trim away the excess from the skirt seam. To be honest, this is something I probably should have tested before I started sewing on the final dress, but we're going with it. We're just gonna go along with it. So let's now trim away all this excess. You might have seen there's quite a bit of excess on this seam that makes the seam very, very visible on the skirt front. So I'm gonna trim that away as close as I can to my latest stitching, and let's see if that holds well. I've now trimmed away most of the excess around the seams, and I've tested the strength of the seam. I mean, I'm not ripping at it because it's still very delicate lace, but so far it seems to be encapsulating everything really well. There is some puckering on the seams, and I guess that's because when I sewed it, there was some stretching happening, but this dress needs an iron anyhow, but this is what the seam looks like at the moment. Can I just say, I'm in love with this dress. Like just the silk blue underskirt. I love it a lot. Here, I think you saw it on me. Here's the left side hem, and then you compare that to the right side hem. And it's, the problem is that this bit is also shorter than the front bit, but I think that when I put the hem in towards the waist or underbust, I can pull this up, and the length, because I don't mind the blue petticoat showing underneath. I think that's quite common even in the fashion plates at the time for the dresses overdressed to be a little bit shorter than the underdress. But why wasn't I working with a mannequin in the first place? I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pin all of the matching bodice seams together to see, like, except for the underbust seams, so around the shoulders and the sleeves and things, and see where we're at from there. At the back right now, and I think you can see that from the weight, especially because we have so much fabric gathered up here that we've had some stretch out here. The back looks pretty good. It's just a lot of messy seams, but I think we're in an okay spot with the back. We go back to the front, and I think that this is kind of where we get a bit of a mess. So now that the hem is tacked into the appropriate place up there, or not the hem, sorry, the waistline or the underbust line is tacked to the appropriate place up there, you can see really quite how short this seam is. The petticoat sticks out quite a bit underneath looking. So let me pin a few more things on the bodice to make sure that the stuff on the bodice is sitting in the right place, and then we can start work on evening out the hem a little bit by placing the waist, by marking where the waist seam is and pinching the extra up into that waist seam. so I think our main concern with the hem was at this side where, sorry, I did my hair on the floor yesterday, so that's that mess. That side was quite high, but now I'm liking the general line from the back to the front on this side. It's still a little iffy, so I might touch it up a few more times before I make a final decision. But if you look, at least from the front, I think we're looking generally a little bit more even. I might want to pull up that side a little bit more right there. Oh, yeah, and then when we look from this side, I think we need to pull this bit up a bit more, but we're getting there. But can you see how much difference I have to pinch out of the top here? So I'm going to make all of this disappear into a waist seam. All right, after some more poking and prodding and turning and turning and turning, I think I have pinched out exactly what I need to pinch out from the underbust area. So let's start doing some hand sewing while we stand. This is gonna be tiring. Sewing, trimming, re-sewing in ends that started to run away from me. I did have a few panels that started to unravel. That was really scary. Trimming and re-trimming this dress. I think we're finally at the point where I can do a final reveal to you of this dress in its current iteration. I have some thoughts, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. It's hard to explain just how ridiculously happy I am to be traipsing around the countryside wearing my handmade knit Regency dress. This has been a dream of mine for so long, and I feel like I am living them out, but it's also kind of funny to be kind of in ball gown wear and hiking up my skirts to hike through the countryside. But I am so happy with this dress. I put it on and I feel like I walked straight out of one of my favorite movies, Pride and Prejudice. Honestly, I could not be happier when I'm wearing this. Of course, there's always going to be some things that I might want to do differently or change in the future. That's kind of what I mentioned with this version or iteration of the dress. The hems are a little plain for me, so I might want to do something down at the bottom of the hems. And here at the top, that ribbon accent, I don't like that it is so wobbly and wiggly. I want that to be a little bit more of a straight line, so I want to figure out something with that as well. It's also generally, I feel like just missing a few other trimmings, so I want to look back at other fashion plates and see if I can get other inspiration for it. But the silhouette and the fact that it is entirely knit mesh lace on top of a deep blue satin petticoat or underdress is just a dream come true for me. Thank you so much for sticking around and joining me on this entire journey of making and knitting and sewing this entire piece together. There were definitely some headaches in there, but I love the challenge, and the happiness and joy that I get from being able to wear this is insane. It's just wonderful. I am actually going to a Regency event in the near future, so I might make some changes to this dress before then. I made this and I had planned on making this for that event, so I'm very excited that I don't just get to have it in my closet, which is also a huge bonus, but I get to wear this to a Regency meetup. So I'm excited. I'm looking forward to that. Again, thank you so much for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. I know there's many ways that you could decide to spend your time, and I am so happy that you chose to spend this little bit of time with me, and I hopefully will see you all again very soon. Bye.